Hello there, and welcome. Go ahead and find your comfortable spot for the night. You can let the day begin to fade, and just allow your body to feel its own weight. There is nothing you need to do right now, except to settle in and just listen. I think there's a quiet pressure that many of us feel, especially at the end of the day. It's the pressure to be a certain kind of person. We have this image in our heads of the person we should be, a wise and a calm and a perfectly consistent person. A person who always says the right thing, who is always productive, who never gets lazy, who is never a walking contradiction. A kind of perfect inner sage. And at night, when the world is quiet, our mind often likes to review the day's evidence. And it compares the person we actually were with this perfect person we think we should be. And it finds all the messy human moments. The moment of distraction, the moment of impatience, the moment of just feeling a little bit lazy. And with each one, there's a quiet and a very tiring feeling of having fallen short. But tonight, we're going to invite in a very different kind of philosopher. A man who would have looked at that perfect inner sage and would have probably just laughed. His name was Michel de Montaigne. And while other great, serious philosophers were trying to build grand, unbreakable systems of thought, Montaigne was busy with something else entirely. He was busy studying the single, most fascinating, and most confusing subject he could find, himself. He wrote about his cat, his kidney stones, and the profound, unapologetic pleasure of a good nap. His great, and very quiet, secret was this. The goal of a good life is not to become a perfect, flawless sage. The goal is to become a good, and a kind, and a compassionate manager of your own, very real, and very imperfect self. So, you don't need to take any of this too seriously. Your only job is to relax. Just get comfortable as we explore the quiet and the deeply comforting wisdom of a man who found his peace not in the heavens, but in the simple, messy reality of his own ordinary life. When we think of a great philosopher, we usually picture a very serious man with a very serious beard, thinking very serious thoughts. We imagine him looking up at the stars, pondering the great, cosmic questions of existence, the nature of truth, the structure of the universe, the meaning of life. And then there was Montaigne. Montaigne was a French nobleman who lived in a stone tower in the 16th century. And he was, without a doubt, a great philosopher. But he wasn't very interested in the stars. He was much more interested in what was right here, on the ground, in his own messy and his own very ordinary life. He wrote a collection of short pieces, which he called essays. The word essay back then meant something like a try or an attempt, and that's all he felt he was doing. And the subjects of these essays were not the grand, abstract topics you might expect. Instead, Montaigne wrote about his cat. He had a famous line where he wondered, "When I am playing with my cat, how do I know that she is not playing with me?" He was fascinated by the simple, unsolvable mystery of another creature's mind. He wrote about his kidney stones at great, and sometimes very graphic, length. He described the pain, the fear, and the simple, physical reality of living in a body that was not always working perfectly. He wrote about his own forgetfulness, his laziness, the way his mind would wander off in the middle of a serious conversation. He wrote about the smell of his own jacket. He wrote about his thumbs. He wrote about his dislike of fruit. And this is where things get interesting. He wasn't doing this to be funny or to be shocking. He was doing it as a profound philosophical act. Because Montaigne had one, single, and a very beautiful core belief. He believed that the entire human condition, with all of its grand tragedies and its beautiful comedies, all of its wisdom and all of its foolishness, was contained, in its entirety, in one single, ordinary person. And the only person he could truly study, with any real honesty, was himself. So he treated his own life as a kind of science experiment. He believed that if he could just look closely enough and honestly enough at his own strange habits, his own inconsistencies, his own small pleasures, and his own minor pains, he could find a truth that was more real and more useful than any grand, abstract theory about the universe. And this is a wonderfully calming and a deeply freeing idea for us as we lie here at the end of our own day. Because our own day was probably not a grand, epic, philosophical event. It was probably a collection of small and of ordinary and of sometimes very messy moments. And the quiet wisdom of Montaigne is the permission to see all of that not as a failure, not as a distraction from the important things, but as the very stuff of life itself. The small and the boring and the deeply human details of your own day are not something to be ignored. They are, in their own quiet way, the place where all the wisdom in the world can be found. Let's talk about the mind itself. Specifically, the kind of mind that we are all told we should have. The ideal mind, in our world, is a mind that is sharp and focused and reliable. It is a mind that has a good memory, a mind that can stay on task. A person who can remember names and dates and appointments is seen as a person who is competent and intelligent and has their life together. And a mind that wanders, a mind that gets distracted, a mind that forgets things, that is seen as a flaw. It is a sign of a lack of discipline. It can be a source of great and of personal anxiety. We get frustrated with ourselves when we walk into a room and completely forget why we are there. We feel a flicker of shame when someone tells us a story and our mind drifts off halfway through. We are constantly trying to tame our own minds, to force them to be the sharp, reliable tools we think they ought to be. And then there was Montaigne. Montaigne had, by his own cheerful and constant admission, a terrible mind. He wrote, without any sense of shame at all, that his memory was one of the worst in the world. He said that if he were to tell a story, he would often forget the ending before he even got there. He admitted that he had a hard time recognizing people he had just met. He would read a book, and then a year later, he could pick up the exact same book and it would feel completely new to him, because he had absolutely no memory of ever having read it before. And his mind was not just forgetful, it was a wanderer. He would sit down to write about one subject, and his mind would immediately leap to 3 or 4 other, completely unrelated ideas. His own essays are a perfect reflection of this. They are a beautiful and a charming and a very human mess of digressions and detours. He was a master of the unfinished thought, the sentence that just trails off into a new idea. Now, a normal person, and certainly a normal philosopher, would see these as terrible flaws to be corrected. But Montaigne saw them as a kind of secret freedom. He believed that his wandering mind was not a sign of a lack of focus. It was a sign of a deep and a playful curiosity. He loved to follow his thoughts wherever they wanted to go, like a person taking a walk through a forest with no particular destination in mind. He knew that the most interesting discoveries are often made when you get a little bit lost. This constant, gentle, and non-judgmental exploration of his own inner world was the very heart of his entire philosophy. And his bad memory, he decided, was not a weakness, but a gift. He said that because he forgot everything, the world was always new to him. An old story told by a friend was always an interesting story. An old book was always a new adventure. But even more importantly, he said that his bad memory was the reason he was not a resentful person. If someone insulted him or was rude to him, he would simply, and without any effort, forget about it in a few days. He was literally incapable of holding a grudge. His mind, in its beautiful and its natural forgetfulness, was constantly wiping its own slate clean. It was a mind that could not be burdened by the heavy weight of the past, because it was a mind that was always, and gently, and naturally, letting the past go. And this is a wonderfully calming and a deeply freeing thought for us as you lie here now. Your own mind is probably wandering, even as you listen to this. It might drift to a thought about your day or a memory from your past, and the Spartan in you might want to discipline it, to force it back into a state of perfect focus. But the spirit of Montaigne would just smile. He would invite you to just let it roam, to not judge its detours, to see your own flawed and your own very human mind not as a problem to be solved, but as a quiet and a beautiful and a deeply interesting landscape to be gently explored. In the world of philosophy, the mind is almost always the hero of the story. From Plato onward, the great thinkers have celebrated the power of pure reason. They have seen the mind as the high and the noble and the rational part of ourselves, the part that is supposed to be the wise and the disciplined ruler. And the body, in this story, is usually the villain. The body is the messy and the irrational and the needy part of ourselves. It is the wild animal that is always trying to lead us astray with its inconvenient hungers, its illogical pains, and its embarrassing desires. It is the thing that the noble mind is supposed to conquer and to control. And then there was Montaigne, who looked at this entire ancient battle, and he quietly and gently, and with a deep and a profound sense of trust, decided to take the other side. Montaigne did not see the body as an enemy. He saw it as his oldest and his closest and his most honest friend. He believed that our bodies possess a kind of deep and a silent and a very ancient wisdom that our clever and our anxious and our constantly second-guessing minds can never hope to match. He learned this most profoundly from his own experience with pain. As we heard, he suffered for many years from excruciatingly painful kidney stones. And at first, he did what any of us would do. His mind went to war with his body. He was terrified. He read every medical book he could find. He listened to the conflicting and the often very foolish advice of all the doctors. He spent his nights in a state of high and of intellectual and of very stressful anxiety, trying to think his way out of his suffering. But over the years, he realized that all this frantic mental activity was not helping. In fact, it was making things worse. It was adding a second layer of suffering, the suffering of fear, on top of the simple, physical reality of the pain. And so, he decided to try a radical experiment. He decided to fire his mind from the job of being his doctor. And instead, he just decided to trust his body. He stopped fighting the pain, and he just started to listen to it. He learned to pay attention to its rhythms. He learned to give it what it was asking for, whether that was a moment of rest, or a glass of water, or just a quiet groan of release. He turned toward his own physical experience, not with fear, but with a kind of gentle and a quiet and a very respectful curiosity. And a strange thing happened. The pain didn't go away, but his suffering was greatly reduced. By letting go of the mental battle, he had found a kind of peace even in the middle of his pain. And he applied this same gentle and this same trusting wisdom to the small and the simple pleasures of the body, too. He famously wrote about his love of a good afternoon nap. He did not see this as a sign of laziness. He saw it as a conversation with his own body. When his body told him it was tired, he listened. He did not argue with it. He did not tell it that it should be more productive. He just quietly and gratefully, and without any apology, gave it the rest that it was asking for. He saw his own, simple, and his very human, weariness not as a flaw to be overcome, but as a wise and a gentle teacher, guiding him back to a state of balance. And this is a profound and a deeply calming idea for us as we lie here now. Your own body is speaking to you. It is communicating its own deep and its own very simple wisdom. It is telling you that it is tired. It is telling you that the time for doing is over. It is telling you that it needs and that it deserves this moment of rest. And the quiet wisdom of Montaigne is simply this: to trust that voice, to let go of the noisy and the anxious and the often very foolish arguments of your own mind, and to just listen with a simple and a deep and a very profound respect to the quiet and the ancient and the deeply trustworthy wisdom of your own tired body. Montaigne lived in a time of great and of violent turmoil. His country, France, was torn apart by religious wars. Neighbors were killing neighbors. The world outside the walls of his stone tower was a loud and a dangerous and a deeply unpredictable place. And Montaigne was not a hermit. He was a nobleman, a mayor, a public figure. He had to navigate this chaotic world every single day. And he knew, from his own experience, that a mind that is constantly engaged with the noise of the world, with its arguments, its demands, and its anxieties, can never find a true and a lasting peace. And so, he offered a beautiful and a very practical and a deeply calming piece of advice. He said that every person should create, within themselves, what he called an arrière boutique, a back shop, a private room, in the very back of your own soul, a place that is entirely and completely your own. Let's just picture this for a moment. Imagine your mind is a busy shop that opens out onto the main street of the world. All day long, this front shop is open for business. Customers are coming and going. These are the other people in your life, your colleagues, your family, your friends. There are deliveries being made. These are the demands, the deadlines, the news of the world. There is a constant coming and going, a constant exchange of goods and of opinions. And to be a functioning person in the world, you have to tend to this shop. You have to be present. You have to engage with the business of the day. But Montaigne says that a wise person never lets this front shop be their only home. A wise person always, and deliberately, and with a great sense of care, establishes this back shop, this quiet, inner room. And what is this room like? It is a place where the noise of the street cannot enter. It is a place that is furnished only with the things that are truly your own thoughts, your own quiet reflections, your own true and unvarnished self. It is a place where you are not performing for anyone. You are not trying to be a good employee or a good friend or a good citizen. You are not trying to be anyone at all. You are just being. And Montaigne's advice was to make a habit of retreating into this room as often as possible. Even in the middle of a busy day, he said, you can, for just a moment, let your mind slip away from the noise of the front shop and just rest in the quiet of this inner sanctuary. And most importantly, this is the place you must return to at the end of the day. When the business of the day is over, you don't have to stay in the front shop, tidying the shelves and worrying about tomorrow's customers. You can, with a great sense of relief, pull down the shade, lock the front door, and make the quiet and the gentle and the deeply comforting journey back into this completely private and a completely peaceful room. This is what you are doing right now as you lie here. You have closed the shop of your daily life. The customers have all gone home. The noise of the world's arguments and demands has faded, and you have made the quiet retreat into the back shop of your own soul. This place, this feeling, is entirely and completely your own. No one else can enter here. No one else's opinion matters here. You are not being judged here. You are not being measured. This is your quiet, and your safe, and your profoundly personal refuge. And in this room, you can let go of all the roles you had to play today. You can take off the costume. You can just sit in the quiet, and in the stillness, and in the deep and the simple, and the very profound comfort of just being yourself, with yourself at the end of a long and a very busy day. Let's stay here for a little while, in the quiet and the safety of this private back shop of the soul. This is a place where we can be completely and utterly honest with ourselves. And one of the things that Montaigne was most honest about was the strange and the often very painful gap between the person we are and the person we think we should be. In the world of philosophy and in the world of religion, there is often a very powerful and a very demanding ideal that is presented to us. It is the ideal of the perfect sage or the perfect saint, a being who has completely conquered their own human nature, a being who is always perfectly calm, perfectly rational, perfectly virtuous, a being who is, in essence, a kind of angel, a creature of pure spirit, untroubled by the messy and the inconvenient and the often very contradictory reality of having a human body and a human mind. And many of us, in our quietest and most private moments, carry this ideal around with us. We have this image of a perfect, angelic version of ourselves that we are supposed to be living up to. And we spend a great deal of our lives in a state of quiet and of constant and of very tiring frustration that we are always and inevitably falling short of this impossible goal. Montaigne looked at this entire, exhausting project, and he saw it not as a noble quest, but as a kind of beautiful and a very dangerous foolishness. He had a famous line where he said, "They want to get out of themselves and escape from the man. This is madness. Instead of changing into angels, they change into beasts." What did he mean by this? He meant that when we set an impossible and an inhuman standard for ourselves, we are guaranteeing our own failure. And when we inevitably fail to be the perfect angels we think we should be, we don't just gently fall back to being a normal human. We often collapse into the other extreme. The extreme of self-loathing, of shame, of feeling like a complete and a total failure. A beast. Think of the person who decides they are going to be a perfect angel of healthy eating. They make a vow to never again eat a single unhealthy thing. But this is an impossible, inhuman standard. And the moment they slip up, the moment they eat one cookie, they don't just say, "Ah, well, I am a human being who sometimes likes a cookie." No, they often feel such a sense of failure, such a sense of having broken their angelic vow, that they swing to the other extreme. They think, "Well, I've already failed. I am a beast with no self-control, so I might as well eat the entire box." This is the folly of trying to be an angel. It is a game that is rigged against us from the very beginning. And so, Montaigne's gentle and his quiet and his deeply compassionate advice was to simply and completely, and with a great sense of relief, abandon the project entirely. His philosophy is an invitation to let go of the exhausting work of trying to be an angel and to instead take up the much more interesting and the much more achievable and the much kinder project of just learning how to be a good and a decent human being. A human being is not a perfect and a consistent and an unwavering creature. A human being is a messy and a beautiful and a walking contradiction. A human being is a creature who can have a profound philosophical thought in one moment and then completely forget what they were thinking about in the next. A human being is a creature who can be generous and kind in the morning and a little bit selfish and irritable in the afternoon. And Montaigne is telling us, from the quiet of his stone tower, that this is not a failure. This is not something to be fixed. This is just what we are. And the truest and the deepest kind of peace is found not in trying to escape from this messy and this beautiful and this very human reality, but in learning to inhabit it with a sense of gentleness, of curiosity, and of a deep, and of a quiet, and of an unconditional kindness toward yourself. So, we have just been given this wonderful and this deeply freeing permission to let go of the exhausting project of trying to be a perfect angel. We have been invited, instead, to simply be the messy and the beautiful and the often very contradictory human beings that we actually are. But a question naturally arises from this. If we are not striving for perfection, then what are we striving for? If we are not on a grand and a heroic and a very serious quest to become a flawless sage, then what is the point of it all? And the answer that Montaigne gives us is found in the very title he chose for his life's work. The title of his great book, as we heard, was the Essays. And for us, today, that word, essay, usually means a formal and a structured and a very serious piece of writing, where you have to prove a point and come to a clear conclusion. But in Montaigne's time, the French word he used, essay, meant something much, much softer and much more humble. It meant, quite simply, a try, an attempt, a trial. And this was not just a title for his book. This was his entire philosophy for his life. He believed that his life was not a performance that was being graded. It was not a test that he could pass or fail. He saw his life, and every single day in it, as just a series of little tries. A series of small, and of curious, and of often very clumsy, attempts to understand the world and to understand himself. Think of the difference in the feeling between those two ideas. The idea of performing. Your life is filled with a deep and a constant pressure. You are on a stage. There is an audience. You are worried about getting your lines right. You are afraid of making a mistake. The feeling is one of anxiety. But the idea of just trying is completely different. It is a state of gentle and of curious and of low pressure exploration. When you are just trying something, the stakes are very low. There is no audience. There is no grade. The goal is not to achieve a perfect result. The goal is simply the experience of the attempt itself. Failure is not a catastrophe. It is just a piece of interesting data that you can learn from for your next try. This is how Montaigne looked at his own choices and his own days. When he tried to be a patient and a virtuous person, and he succeeded for a few hours, he didn't see that as a great victory. He just saw it as an interesting try. And when, later in the day, he found himself feeling a little bit irritable and impatient, he didn't see that as a great failure. He just saw it as another, equally interesting, try. He was just a human being, trying out different ways of being in the world. And this is a profound and a deeply calming and a very compassionate way to look back on your own day as you lie here now. Your day, with all of its ups and all of its downs, was not a test of your worth as a person. It was just today's try. It was today's attempt. The moments where you felt you were at your best, the moments of kindness, of focus, of patience, these were not signs that you are a perfect angel. They were just a part of the try. And the moments where you felt you fell short, the moments of distraction, of selfishness, of weariness, these were not signs that you are a failed beast. They were also just a part of the try. And the great, and the quiet, and the deeply restful secret of Montaigne is this. The only thing that is required of you is to be willing to get up tomorrow and make another gentle, and another curious, and another imperfect try. And in this thought, there is a profound release. It releases you from the heavy burden of having to have gotten it all right today. You didn't have to. You were not performing. You were just trying. And now, the try is over. The attempt for today is complete. And you can just let it all go, and you can rest. Let's stay with this idea of a life that is just a series of gentle tries, rather than a great and a serious performance. This way of thinking was rooted in a very deep and a very central part of Montaigne's personality. And that was his profound and his quiet and his lifelong distrust of big, perfect, and unforgiving ideas. Montaigne lived in an age, not unlike our own, that was obsessed with grand and with absolute and with very certain theories about the world. He lived in the middle of the violent and the bloody religious wars between the Catholics and the Protestants. And on both sides of this conflict, there were men who were completely and utterly convinced that they had a monopoly on the truth, with a capital T. They had a perfect and a flawless and a complete system for how the world worked and how every single person should live. And Montaigne looked at these men of great and of unwavering certainty, and he saw the consequences of their perfect ideas. He saw that their certainty did not lead to peace. It led to arrogance. It led to a deep and a profound intolerance for anyone who disagreed with them. And ultimately, it led to violence and to suffering and to the tearing apart of his entire country. And he came to a very quiet and a very radical and a deeply humane conclusion. He concluded that great and perfect and all-encompassing ideas were one of the most dangerous things in the entire world. He was a man who was much more comfortable with the small and the messy and the very human reality of doubt. He believed that the words, "I don't know," which we explored in our talk about Socrates, were not a sign of weakness, but a sign of a deep and a compassionate wisdom. He was a man who was always willing to see the other side of an argument. His own mind, as we have heard, was a wandering and a contradictory place, and so he was naturally suspicious of any idea that claimed to have solved all the contradictions. He would have looked at the great, logical systems of a philosopher like Plato, with his perfect and his unchanging world of the forms, and he would have been respectfully skeptical. He might have said, "That is a beautiful and a very comforting idea, but my own, real, and my very human experience is one of constant change, and of imperfection, and of not knowing. And my loyalty must be to my own, real, and my own flawed experience." And this is a wonderfully calming and a deeply freeing idea for us as we lie here now, because we, too, are surrounded by great and by perfect and by very demanding ideas. We are bombarded with perfect diets and perfect productivity systems and perfect parenting philosophies and perfect ways to live a successful life. And our own inner expert can often grab onto one of these big, perfect ideas, and then it turns that idea into a new and a very unforgiving ruler for our own inner world. It becomes a new way to judge ourselves, and a new way to find ourselves lacking. Montaigne's gentle philosophy is an invitation to just let go of all of it. It is the permission to be skeptical of any idea that promises you a perfect and a simple and a final answer to the messy and the complicated business of being a human being. It's the freedom to not have to have a grand, unifying theory of your own life. It's the comfort of being able to say, "I am just trying to figure it out as I go. Some days, I think one thing, and other days, I think another. And that is okay." It is the profound and the quiet and the deeply restful peace that is found not in finding a perfect and an unchanging idea to believe in, but in becoming perfectly and deeply and compassionately comfortable with the beautiful and the messy and the very human reality of your own uncertainty. We've just seen how Montaigne had a deep and a healthy suspicion of any big, perfect idea that claimed to have all the answers. He had seen the damage that certainty could do in the world around him, and he was much more comfortable in the quiet, and the gentle, and the much more humble space of doubt. This brings us to a place of deep and of profound comfort, a place that stands in direct opposition to the frantic, problem-solving energy of our inner expert. It is the quiet and the deeply restful state that can be found in a simple and an honest and a completely unapologetic "I don't know." For most of us, for our entire lives, those three words are a sign of failure. We are taught that "I don't know" is the wrong answer on the test. It is the moment of weakness in a job interview. It can feel like an admission of incompetence. And so, we learn to be afraid of it. We learn to hide it. Our inner expert believes that its primary job is to never have to say, "I don't know." It believes it must always have a theory, a plan, an opinion, a solution. And it will work tirelessly and anxiously all through the night to avoid that feeling of unknowing. Montaigne would have looked at this frantic and this deeply tiring activity, and he would have just gently and quietly shaken his head. Because for him, the words "I don't know" were not a sign of failure. They were a sign of wisdom. They were a sign of intellectual honesty. And most importantly, they were the gateway to a kind of profound and a very gentle inner peace. Let's think about the kinds of questions that our minds are wrestling with as we lie here in the dark. The mind is often working as a kind of fortune teller, trying to answer the question, what will happen tomorrow? It runs through 100 different scenarios, trying to find a certain and a predictable path through the uncertainty of the future. And it is an exhausting and a completely impossible task. And the quiet and the honest and the deeply calming answer to that question is simply, "I don't know." The mind is often working as a kind of historian or a detective, digging through the past, trying to definitively answer the question, why did that happen? Or what was the real reason they did that? and it is a search for a kind of certainty that can never be found. And the quiet, and the honest, and the deeply restful answer is, I don't know. And the mind is often working as a kind of judge, trying to come to a final, and a binding, and a perfect verdict on our own character. It asks the question, am I a good person? Am I a success? It is trying to carve our messy, and our contradictory, and our constantly changing self into a single, and a simple, and a permanent label. And the quiet, and the honest, and the deeply compassionate answer is, I don't know. I am just trying. For Montaigne, these 3 words were not a dead end. They were an open door. They were the moment you stopped fighting. They were the moment you let go of the heavy, and the impossible, and the deeply tiring burden of having to be the all-knowing expert of your own life. So, as you lie here now, you can gently offer this phrase to your own, tired, and your own very hard-working mind. When a big, and a heavy, and an unsolvable question comes to visit, you do not have to wrestle with it. You do not have to find the answer. You can, with a great sense of relief, and with the quiet wisdom of a man in a stone tower from a long, long time ago, just gently and honestly, and without any apology at all, say to yourself, I don't know. And in that simple admission, in that profound act of intellectual surrender, you can find a quiet and a spacious and a deeply restful kind of peace. We have spent a good deal of our time together exploring these quiet and these very human ideas from Montaigne. We have talked about the freedom of a wandering mind, the wisdom of the body, and the deep comfort of admitting that we just don't know. And all of these ideas, like small, gentle streams, are flowing into one great and a very calm and a very peaceful river. And that river is the deep and the profound appreciation for the ordinary day. In our world, the word ordinary can often feel like a bit of an insult. We are a culture that is obsessed with the extraordinary. We celebrate the great achievements, the peak experiences, the once-in-a-lifetime moments. Our stories, our movies, our social media feeds, they are all a highlight reel of the most exciting and the most beautiful and the most dramatic parts of life. And at the end of our own day, which was probably not a great and a dramatic and a cinematic event, we can be left with a quiet and a nagging and a very tiring feeling of having fallen short. Our own, real, and our very ordinary life can feel a little bit boring, a little bit of a letdown, when we compare it to the extraordinary stories we are always telling ourselves we should be living. Montaigne would have looked at this entire way of thinking as a kind of madness. He would have seen it as a recipe for a life of constant and of guaranteed dissatisfaction, because he believed that the true and the deep and the most reliable substance of our lives is not found in the rare and the dramatic and the peak experiences. It is found in the small and the repetitive and the deeply familiar texture of our ordinary days. He famously wrote, "The most beautiful lives, in my opinion, are those that conform to the common and human model, with order, but without miracle and without extravagance." Let that sink in for a moment. The most beautiful lives are those that conform to the common and human model. This is a radical and a deeply comforting and a profoundly kind idea. It is the suggestion that a good life, a beautiful life, a successful life, is not about becoming a superhero or a saint or a celebrity. It is about the simple and the quiet and the often very difficult art of just being a decent and a well-ordered and a reasonably kind human being. From this gentle perspective, your own ordinary day, the one you have just lived, can be seen in a completely new light. The simple and the perhaps slightly boring meal that you ate was not a failure to have a gourmet experience. It was a quiet success. It was your body and the world providing you with the simple and the profound and the very necessary gift of nourishment. The repetitive and the perhaps slightly tedious tasks that you performed at your job were not a sign that your life is unexciting. They were a quiet success. They were a sign of your own competence, your own participation in the simple and the necessary and the deeply human rhythm of work and of contribution. The quiet and the perhaps uneventful evening that you have had was not a missed opportunity for a great adventure. It was a quiet success. It was a moment of peace, a moment of safety, a moment of simple and of profound and of deeply necessary rest. The kindness of an ordinary day is that it does not ask you to be a hero. It does not demand that you perform a miracle. It only asks that you show up, that you be present, that you do your best, and that you be gentle with yourself when your best is not perfect. And as you lie here now, at the end of your own, very ordinary, and therefore very beautiful day, you can let go of the pressure to have been anything more than what you were. Your day was not a failure. It was not a disappointment. It was just a day, a common and a human day. And in the quiet and the gentle and the deeply compassionate philosophy of Montaigne, that is more than enough. It is, in fact, everything. Let's stay with this idea of the ordinary human life for a little while longer, and let's look at one of its most common and its most deeply unsettling features, and that is the feature of inconsistency. I think if we are truly honest with ourselves, one of the most confusing things about being a human being is that we are a walking and a talking and a constantly changing contradiction. Think about your own self. There is a part of you that wants to be healthy and disciplined and to wake up early in the morning. And there is another, equally real, part of you that wants to be comfortable and to sleep in late and to eat the delicious, unhealthy thing. There is a part of you that is generous and kind and deeply compassionate toward other people. And there is another part of you that can, at times, be a little bit selfish, a little bit irritable, a little bit judgmental. There is a part of you that is brave and confident and ready to take on the world. And there is another part of you that is anxious and insecure and just wants to hide from it all. And our inner expert, the part of our mind that loves order and that hates a puzzle it cannot solve, looks at all of these contradictions and it becomes very, very stressed. It doesn't know which one is the real you. And it spends a huge amount of its energy trying to force you into a single and a simple and a consistent box. It is constantly judging one part of you as good and another part of you as bad. And it is always trying to get the good parts to finally and completely and for all time defeat the bad parts. And the result of this inner civil war is a deep and a constant and a very tiring feeling of being at odds with yourself. It's the feeling that you are a problem to be solved, a flawed project that you must constantly be working on. Montaigne, in his quiet tower, looked at this same deep and human mystery of his own inconsistency, and he came to a completely different and a much, much more peaceful conclusion. He did not see his own contradictions as a flaw. He saw them as the most interesting and the most beautiful and the most fundamentally true thing about himself. He wrote that he was so many different people from one moment to the next that he was more different from himself than he was from other people. He saw his own inner world not as a single, consistent character, but as a kind of bustling and a chaotic and a very lively marketplace of different voices and different desires and different opinions, all of them coming and going. And his great, and his very strange, and his deeply calming, philosophical move was to simply stop taking sides. He stopped trying to be the judge. He stopped trying to force one part of himself to defeat the other. And instead, he just became a curious and a gentle and a very compassionate observer of his own inner chaos. He saw the part of him that wanted to be lazy and the part of him that wanted to be productive, not as a war between good and evil, but just as two equally real and equally valid and equally human parts of himself. And this is a profound and a deeply freeing gift that he offers to us. It is the permission to stop fighting the civil war inside your own head. It is the permission to accept that you are a walking contradiction, and that this is not a sign that you are broken. It is a sign that you are a complex and a rich and a deeply interesting human being. As you lie here now, you can just let go of the battle. You can let the lazy part of you and the productive part of you just lie down together, side by side. You can let the brave part of you and the anxious part of you finally declare a truce. You don't have to be one simple, consistent thing. You can just be you. The whole, messy, beautiful, and completely contradictory you. And in that quiet, and that gentle, and that deeply compassionate act of radical self-acceptance, you can find a kind of inner peace, a kind of wholeness that the constant and the tiring and the deeply unwinnable civil war could never, ever provide. We've now explored Montaigne's ideas about the mind, the body, and the gentle art of being a flawed and a very inconsistent human being. Now let's bring all of this quiet wisdom home to the one place where we can truly practice this philosophy of gentle self-acceptance. Let's bring it right here, into your own bed. Montaigne, as we heard, lived in a stone tower, and at the very top of this tower, he had his library. This was his back shop, his private sanctuary. It was a circular room, lined with 1,000 of his beloved books. It had a view out over his estate, and this room was his kingdom. It was the one place in the entire, chaotic world where he was the absolute and the undisputed ruler. In the world outside, he was a nobleman, a mayor, a husband, a friend. He had 1,000 different roles to play and 1,000 different duties to perform. But in this room, he had only one role, to be himself. And he had only one duty, to be honest with himself. He wrote that this was the one place where he was the king, and that all his other responsibilities were a kind of foreign slavery. This room was his refuge. It was his freedom. It was the physical representation of his own, private, inner world. And as you lie here now, in your own room, in your own bed, you are in a very similar kind of place. This bed, for tonight, is your own quiet and private kingdom. Think about it. The moment you close your bedroom door, you are crossing a kind of border. You are leaving the public world behind, the world where you have to perform all of your different roles, and you are entering a space that is entirely and completely your own. In this kingdom, you are the only authority. The opinions of the outside world, the demands of your job, the expectations of other people, they have no jurisdiction here. Their power stops at the bedroom door. In this quiet kingdom, you are not required to be productive. You are not required to be strong. You are not required to be consistent. You are not required to be anything at all. The only law of this kingdom is the gentle and the unapologetic law of your own comfort and your own peace. This is a profound and a deeply calming idea. It reframes this simple, physical space as a place of immense and of quiet power. It is your own, personal stone tower. So, just for a moment, I want you to feel this. Feel the reality of your own private and your own quiet kingdom. Feel the safety of its invisible walls. Feel the profound and the simple comfort of being in a place where you are the only one in charge. In this kingdom, you can finally, and with a great sense of relief, take off the heavy armor of the day. You can set aside the shield of your public personality. You can let go of all the effort of being the person you are supposed to be out there in the world. And you can just be the quiet and the gentle and the deeply and the truly sovereign ruler of this small and this silent and this profoundly peaceful land. This is your place. This is your refuge. And in the safety and in the quiet and in the absolute privacy of your own small kingdom, you can finally give yourself permission to truly and deeply, and without any interruption at all, rest. And so, we find ourselves here, in the quiet and the absolute safety of our own private kingdom. The door to the noisy front shop of the world has been closed and locked. The armor of the day has been set aside. We are finally and completely alone with ourselves. And in this final, quiet moment, our inner expert, our tireless inner manager, will often present us with one last and a very heavy piece of work to do. It will pull out a kind of master blueprint. The blueprint for the finished you. This is the blueprint of the person you are supposed to be when all the work is done. The person who is finally wise and calm and successful and has all of their flaws corrected and all of their contradictions resolved. And the mind, in the quiet of the night, likes to take out this blueprint, and it likes to compare the messy and the real and the very human person you were today with this perfect and this flawless and this completely imaginary finished product. And the result is always a feeling of being incomplete, a feeling of being an unfinished project. It's the quiet, nagging, and deeply tiring feeling that you are not there yet. And because you are not finished, the mind believes that you cannot truly and deeply and without any guilt rest. Montaigne, sitting in his own quiet kingdom at the top of his tower, would have looked at this blueprint, and he would have seen it for what it was, the most subtle and the most dangerous of all human follies. His entire life and his entire work was a quiet and a joyful rebellion against this very idea of being finished. Think again of his great book, The Essays. He worked on it for over 20 years, and even after it was first published, he did not see it as a finished product. He would get his own published copies, and he would spend his days scribbling in the margins, adding new thoughts, changing his mind, disagreeing with his own earlier self. The book was never done. It was a living, breathing, and a gloriously unfinished thing right up until the day he died. And this was not because he was a sloppy worker. It was because he knew that his book was just a reflection of himself. And he knew that he, himself, was not a finished product. He was a process. He was a living and a breathing and a constantly changing and a beautifully unfinished human being. To pretend otherwise, to present a final and a polished and a perfectly consistent version of himself, would have been the greatest and the most profound dishonesty of all. And in this idea, he found not a source of anxiety, but a source of profound and of deep and of lasting peace. The peace of being unfinished. It is the permission to stop seeing your life as a project that you are failing to complete. It is the freedom to see your life simply as a story that is still being written. And the chapter of today has been written. It had a beginning and a middle, and now, right now, it is having its end. The chapter is complete, but the book is not. The book of you is not supposed to be finished tonight. And this is the final, and the most gentle, and the most deeply compassionate gift that this old, and this wise, and this very human philosopher offers to us. It is the permission to just put the pen down. You do not have to write the next chapter tonight. You do not have to edit the chapter you just wrote. You do not have to worry about the ending of the story. You just have to allow this one small, and this one ordinary, and this one beautifully imperfect chapter of your life to finally, and truly, and without any further comment, come to a close. And in that quiet, and that gentle, and that deeply restful act of just letting it be done, you can find the profound and the final peace of just being, for tonight, gloriously and beautifully and completely unfinished. And so, our time with the man in the stone tower comes to a quiet end. His essays have been read. His gentle and his rambling and his very human story has been told. The voice of Montaigne, with all his quiet observations about his cat and his naps and his own forgetful mind, can now fade away. His work is done. The only thing he really wanted to tell us is simple. It is okay to just be a person. And the voice that has been your companion on this journey tonight, the one that has been your guide through this gentle philosophy, its work is also now complete. It was only ever meant to be a quiet and a steady presence, a friend to sit with you in the back shop of your own soul. And now that you are here, in the quiet, it can take its leave. Let all the words, and all the ideas, and all the stories dissolve. You don't have to remember any of this. In fact, Montaigne would probably be happy if you forgot it all by morning. Because the goal was never to become an expert on his philosophy. The goal was to feel a little bit of the peace that he found for himself. The peace of letting go. The peace of not having to be a perfect, flawless angel. The peace of not having to be a single, consistent thing. The peace of not having to have all the answers. The essay of your day is written. It was not a perfect piece of work. It was just today's try. And it is done. There is nothing left to edit. There is nothing left to revise. There is only the quiet, and the simple, and the deeply human reality of this moment. The feeling of your tired body, finally at rest in its own quiet kingdom. The gentle, and the steady, and the unapologetic rhythm of your own breath. The deep, and the profound, and the very simple peace of being beautifully, and gloriously, and completely unfinished. So just be a person now. A person who is resting. Just rest.